The sky above Germany, January 1944. A pale winter sun hangs over the world like a cold lamp, its light fractured by vapor trails. 25,000 feet up, the air is so thin that every breath burns. The temperature outside the cockpit canopy sits at 40 degrees below zero. Frost feathers the edges of glass. Oxygen masks hiss softly in the silence between radio bursts. Below, 1,000 silver bombers crawl across the continent, the great American armada of the 8th Air Force, heavy, slow, and vulnerable. Each formation, a perfect box of B-17s and B-24s, holds 10 men, gunners, navigators, pilots, each praying that today won't be their last. Above and around them, darting like guardians between the clouds, fly the new long-range escorts. North American P-51 Mustangs, the voice of Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer, 487th. Fighter squadron crackles through the radio static. Blue flight, we've got bandits 11 o'clock high, 20 plus, coming in fast. Let's get them. He pushes the throttle forward. The Merlin engine answers with a deep rolling roar, not the harsh scream of older planes, but a smooth, confident sound that fills the cockpit like music. The Mustang tilts, sun glinting off its silver fuselage as it dives toward a column of black crosses streaking through the sky. Cinematic action below the battle erupts. Contrails twist and merge like white scars in the heavens. German Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s claw upward from the cloud layer, diving headlong into the bomber stream. The first flak bursts bloom black and red, spreading their smoke petals in the cold air. Meyer's wingman, Lieutenant Red McHugh, spots a 190 diving in from above. He yells into the mic, "Brake, blue leader, brake."
"He's on your tail."
Meyer yanks the stick hard left. The Mustang rolls the G-forces, pressing him deep into the seat. The German overshoots, and in a split second, Meyer reverses the roll, a perfect snap turn, and fires. 650 caliber Browning machine guns tear through the sky. Tracers slice across the blue, connecting one man's life to another's in a heartbeat. The 190 explodes. A flash of orange, a scattering of debris, then nothing but drifting smoke and the faint arc of a parachute. Silence for a moment. Only the hum of the engine and the hiss of oxygen. Then over the radio, splash one. "Good shooting, Colonel." It was not just another kill. It was a symbol of change. For the first time in the long, brutal air war over Europe, the Americans were not the hunted. They were beginning to take control of the skies. For 2 years, the daylight bombing campaign had been a slaughter. B-17s and B-24s had crossed the Rhine without escorts capable of staying with them. The British preferred to bomb at night. The Americans believed in precision daylight raids, but without fighter cover, precision had meant suicide. At Schweinfurt, at Regensburg, entire squadrons vanished. In October 1943, a lone 600 American airmen never returned from the skies above Germany. So high were the losses that the generals in England wondered if the bomber war could continue at all. But now, in the cold dawn of 1944, everything was different. The silver aircraft carving contrails across the German sky carried a new kind of hope, a new kind of weapon. The P-51 Mustang. Introspective pause. Meyer steadies his breathing. His hands are stiff inside his gloves. His oxygen mask smells faintly of rubber and frost. He glances down at his instrument panel. Fuel is good, altitude steady. Outside, the world is a mosaic of white clouds and black smoke columns. He remembers Schweinfurt, the endless funerals, the burned-out bomber fields, the sight of men parachuting through fire, their silk canopies glowing like embers. He remembers promising himself that if there were ever a way to stop that, to fight back, he'd take it. Now flying the Mustang, he can. Shift, ground, perspective. Below, on the frozen fields of Germany, farmers look up at the strange sight of hundreds of aircraft threading across the heavens. The war has come to them, though they cannot touch it. They see only the contrails, hear the distant rumble of engines, and feel the faint tremor as bombs fall on faraway targets. One child standing in a snow-covered pasture points at a small dot moving faster. Then all the rest, a streak of silver light against the winter sky. That unknowingly is the machine that will soon make the Reich's defeat inevitable. Return to cockpit tension building. Meyer glances at his rearview mirror. Another formation of 109s climbs toward the bombers. He radios to his group, "Keep the pressure on. Don't chase them down low. Stay high and cover the forts. The new doctrine, escort first, hunt second." Every pilot knows it. Every one of them hates it. They've trained their whole lives to fight, to duel, to score kills. But now their duty is protection. They are the sword and the shield of the bomber force, and discipline saves lives. Still temptation burns. A pair of 190s dart through the formation below, tearing into a B-17's left wing. Flames bloom. Parachutes spill from the fuselage like white ghosts. Meyer's jaw tightens. "Blue flight, we're going in." He dives again, throttle full forward. The dive cinematic detail. The Mustang screams downward airspeed, climbing past 400 miles per hour. The Merlin engine roars, its propeller tips brushing the speed of sound. Frost shatters from the canopy like crystal rain. The target grows in the gun sight, black cross, silver wing flash of sunlight. He squeezes the trigger. The guns chatter. Metal rips. The German fighter disintegrates, spinning down into the clouds below. Meyer pulls up sharply, G-forces tearing at his body, his vision narrowing to gray. When he levels out, he sees it hundreds of bombers. Stretching to the horizon, their vapor trails shining gold in the afternoon. Light England autumn, 1943. A cold rain drizzles across endless rows of airfields, vast plains of steel and mud. Engines rumble in the distance. Mechanics in oil-stained parkas work under flickering lamps, tightening bolts, patching bullet holes, painting new names over old scars. The air smells of fuel and damp earth. Across the countryside, the great American bomber bases of the 8th Air Force are coming to life before dawn. The crews call it the aluminum overcast, an armada of flying fortresses and liberators that fills the morning sky. Each man climbs aboard his aircraft with a prayer and a superstition, a lucky photo, a silver coin, a piece of home in his pocket. They know that by nightfall, many of them will not return. Historical. By late 1943, the Allied air campaign over Europe was hanging by a thread. The American belief in daylight precision bombing had run into a brutal reality. German fighters and anti-aircraft guns were tearing the bomber fleets to pieces long before they reached their targets. The concept had seemed sound on paper. Industrial targets, ball-bearing plants, oil refineries, aircraft factories could be struck, directly crippling the Reich's war machine. But the planners in Washington and London had underestimated one thing: distance. The Spitfires and Thunderbolts that escorted the bombers simply couldn't reach deep into Germany. At 250 miles from England, they had to turn back, leaving the bombers alone, slow and exposed. Cinematic sequence: the long flight to Schweinfurt, October 14, 1943. 376 B-17s lift off from East Anglia. Their destination: the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, 400 miles inside Germany. Without bearings, the German aircraft industry would grind to a halt, or so the planners believed. The formation crosses the coast at high altitude, sunlight glinting on aluminum wings. The men settle into their stations, oxygen masks, tight flak jackets heavy across their laps. They check their guns, scan the skies. Over Belgium, the first contrails appear, Focke-Wulf 190s climbing fast, then Messerschmitt 109s. The escorts turn for home. The bombers are alone. What follows is 6 hours of unbroken combat. From the ground, German civilians see the fight unfold like a silent storm, streaks of flame and white vapor etched across the blue. From the air, it is chaos, engines on fire, crews bailing out into empty sky. Radio calls cut off mid-sentence. When the last bomber lands in England that night, 60 of them are missing. 600 men are dead, captured, or lost. The survivors climb out of their planes covered in soot and blood. Many of them never fly again. Strategic context. To the generals in England, the numbers are catastrophic. Without long-range escort fighters, the entire bombing campaign may be unsustainable. The British, led by Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, had already turned to night-bombing mass raids by the RAF's heavy Lancasters under the cover of darkness. The Americans under General Ira Eaker and later Jimmy Doolittle refused. They believed that precision daylight bombing could win the war if the bombers could survive long enough to strike their targets. But after Schweinfurt, even Eaker's staff began to lose faith. The Luftwaffe, led by Generals Galland and Spurl, had perfected a system of aerial defense. Radar stations along the coast, command posts directing fighter wings by radio, and concentrated flak batteries protecting every major city. When the bombers crossed into German airspace, the sky would fill with interceptors, hundreds at a time. Each new American raid only seemed to make the enemy stronger. A pilot's perspective. Lieutenant Jack Ilfrey flying a P-38. Lightning remembered the feeling of helplessness. We'd watch the bombers go in. You could see the flak black puffs everywhere. We'd turn for home when our fuel ran out, and when we came back hours later, you'd see empty spots in the formation. Entire groups gone. Pilots cursed the distance, the limited range of their engines, the futility of turning back while their comrades died ahead. Back in the officers' mess that night, the mood was grim. The maps were red with missing squadrons. The chalkboards listed code names, each followed by one word: lost. Something had to change. Technical explanation: the problem of range. The engineering problem was clear. No Allied fighter could escort the bombers to the heart of Germany. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a powerful, durable aircraft, had excellent performance at high altitude, but it drank fuel. The P-38 Lightning, twin-engined and fast, could go farther, but its Allison engine struggled in the cold, thin air over Europe, and the British Spitfire, beloved by pilots, was a short-range interceptor, agile but short-winded. None could escort the bombers to Berlin and back. At meetings in London, planners drew circles on maps radii of fighter range. Each circle stopped short of the targets that mattered most: Berlin, Leipzig, Regensburg, Schweinfurt. Inside those untouched zones, the Luftwaffe was still safe, the desperate search for a solution. The air war had reached a breaking point. By December 1943, the U.S. 8th Air Force had lost more men in Europe than the entire U.S. Marine Corps in the Pacific. There were even discussions in Washington of halting daylight raids altogether, abandoning the strategic bombing offensive until a new escort could be found. But deep within the tangle of aircraft design, bureaus, both American and British, something unexpected was taking shape. An aircraft that had been dismissed, overlooked, and underused. A design that with one simple change would rewrite the story of the air war. Foreshadowing, transition. In a quiet hangar at Rolls-Royce in Derby, England, a test pilot lowers himself into the cockpit of a sleek, unfamiliar fighter. Its skin is smooth and curved, its wings long and elegant. The engine, a new Merlin 61, coughs once, then roars to life. The sound is different, deeper, more confident. He takes it into the air. At 20,000 feet, the plane accelerates, not struggling for breath like the others, but climbing easily, effortlessly. The test pilot radios down, his voice calm but urgent. "Gentlemen, you might want to come see this." That aircraft is the North American P-51 Mustang, once an afterthought, now about to become the most feared fighter of the war. The workshop of War, California, the summer of 1940. Before the Mustang ever roared across the skies of Europe, it began in the quiet hum of a hangar at North American Aviation, Inglewood. The world was on fire. France had fallen. Britain stood alone. And across the Atlantic, America was still a nation half asleep, watching from the sidelines. But the British weren't waiting. Their fighter squadrons were bleeding in the skies over Kent, and they needed planes fast. The Royal Air Force sent a delegation to California with an urgent request. Could North American build the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk under license? James Dutch Kindleberger, the company's sharp-eyed president, listened carefully. Then he made a bold counteroffer. "We can build you a better fighter from scratch in less time than it would take to copy the P-40. The British delegation exchanged doubtful glances. Kindleberger's lead designer, a quiet Austrian immigrant named Edgar Schmood, nodded. "Give us 120 days, he said, and we'll give you an aircraft the Germans haven't seen before." They signed the papers that night. The race begins in the heat of the California summer. North American's factory came alive. Blueprints littered the drafting tables. Riveters hammered through the night. The engineers worked with the urgency of men who knew the outcome of a war might depend on them. Schmood's design broke every convention of the day. He built a laminar flow wing, a smooth, thin shape that reduced drag and increased speed. He positioned the radiator beneath the fuselage in a belly scoop, a feature that looked odd but gave the plane a hidden advantage. It generated thrust from the airflow, acting like a primitive jet. The result was sleek, beautiful, and lethal. They called it the NA-73X, the prototype that would soon become the Mustang. When the first prototype rolled onto the tarmac in September 1940, it gleamed under the California sun like a blade. The men who had built it stood in silence as test pilot Vance Breese climbed into the cockpit. He took off, climbed fast, and leveled out. The plane handled smoothly, turning with precision. After 8 minutes in the air, he landed and stepped down, his face calm but smiling. "Gentlemen," he said, "that's a fighter." It had taken just 117 days from drawing board to flight. Early promise. The RAF received their first Mustangs in early 1942. They were powered by the Allison V1710, engine the same as the P-40. At low altitude, the new fighter was outstanding, fast, agile, beautifully stable, British. Pilots loved it for ground attack and reconnaissance. They flew it over the Channel, strafing German convoys and railway lines. One British pilot called it a Spitfire with legs, but there was a catch, a fatal one. Above 15,000 feet, the Allison engine began to gasp. Its single-stage supercharger couldn't feed the engine with enough air at high altitude. Performance dropped. Speed fell. In the kind of high-altitude combat that dominated Europe, the Mustang was out of its element. It was a brilliant low-level fighter and a disappointment in the thin air where the bombers flew. England, 1942. At Boscombe Down, a British test center, engineers recorded their findings with frustration. One of them, Ronald Harker of Rolls-Royce, scribbled in his notebook, "The airframe is superb. If only it had a Merlin." The Merlin engine, the heart of the Spitfire and Hurricane, was a marvel of British engineering. A two-stage supercharger gave it power at high altitude. If the Mustang could somehow be mated with a Merlin, Harker believed it could be the best fighter in the world. Few took the idea seriously. Engines and airframes weren't meant to be mixed like that, but war leaves little room for convention. Cinematic moment, the experiment. In the autumn of 1942, Rolls-Royce engineers quietly began an experiment at their facility in Derby. They removed the Allison from a Mustang MKI and fitted a Merlin 61 engine, the same power plant used in the Spitfire Mach 9. The first test flight was cautious. The plane rose smoothly, circling the airfield once, twice. Then the pilot opened the throttle. The result was immediate, breathtaking. The Mustang leapt forward, climbing faster than any Allied fighter before it. At 25,000 feet, it was still accelerating. The test pilot radioed back in disbelief. "You've created something special here." A legend takes shape. News of the experiment spread quickly. The American air attaché in London sent cables to Washington. Recommend adoption of Mustang with Merlin engine as priority. Performance remarkable. At North American, Schmood and Kindleberger re-engineered the airframe to accept the new Packard-built Merlin, a US-produced version of the British design. The result was the P-51 Mustang, the first true long-range escort fighter of the war. With drop tanks under its wings, it could fly over 1,000 miles deep into Germany and back. It was faster than the P-47, more maneuverable than the P-38, and could match any German aircraft in the sky. The transformation was complete. From an overlooked ground attack plane to a machine that could change the course of the air war. Character moment, the designer's pride. Edgar Schmood watched the first Merlin-powered Mustang take off from the factory field in California. It lifted gracefully into the blue, the sunlight catching its wings. He turned to a young engineer beside him. "You see," he said softly, "an airplane should look beautiful in order to fly beautifully." To Schmood, it wasn't just machinery. It was the embodiment of flight itself, efficient, balanced, alive. He could not have known that within a year, thousands of young Americans would climb into cockpits bearing his design, flying across a sky filled with fire and steel. England, winter, 1943. Dawn breaks over the airfields of East Anglia like a pale, bruised gray light creeping through low fog, the smell of damp earth and fuel hanging in the air. Rows of new aircraft gleam under tarps, their aluminum skins still unscarred by combat. Ground crews move among them, breath steaming in the cold, checking. Instruments tightening cowling bolts, polishing canopies, until they shine like glass. The men stare at these new machines with a mix of curiosity and awe. On the fuselage, a small stenciled name, P-51 Mustang. But to the veterans who've watched too many friends vanish into German skies, it looks almost too elegant to be real. A young pilot of the 354th Fighter Group, Lieutenant Jack Bradley, runs a gloved hand along the smooth curve of the nose. He taps the metal and whispers, half to himself, half to the aircraft, "You'd better be as good as they say." The power within. Inside the sleek fuselage beats the heart of something extraordinary, the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. At 27 liters, 1,600 horsepower. And with a two-stage, two-speed supercharger, it breathes life into the Mustang in a way no American fighter had before. At high altitude, where other engines gasp for air, the Merlin sings. It pulls the Mustang upward with ease, smooth and responsive even at 30,000 feet. Suddenly, the airspace that had once belonged to the Luftwaffe, the frozen, unreachable sky above the Reich, is within Allied grasp. Engineers call it a mechanical marvel. Pilots call it freedom. Test Flight, 1943. A British test pilot, Ronald Harker, sits in the cockpit of the first Merlin Mustang at Boscombe Down. He pushes the throttle forward and feels the aircraft leap ahead like it's alive. The airspeed needle climbs past 420 miles per hour. Over the radio, his voice carries a mix of calm disbelief and restrained joy. "She climbs like a homesick angel." That phrase spreads like wildfire through Allied bases. Within weeks, the U.S. Army Air Forces order thousands of Merlin Mustangs, the P-51B and later the P-51D, with its distinctive bubble canopy. The era of compromise is over. The Allies finally have a fighter that can fly farther, higher, and faster than anything the enemy can put against it. Strategic impact. At last, the air war has a new shape. With drop tanks under its wings, the Mustang can now escort bombers from the green fields of England all the way to Berlin and back. It's the single breakthrough that every commander has been praying for since 1942. General Jimmy Doolittle, now leading the 8th Air Force, sees what it means instantly. He issues a new order, short, direct, and revolutionary. "Our mission is to destroy the German Air Force anywhere, anytime, any way we can. The bombers are no longer bait. They're the hammer. And the Mustang, the long arm that will finally strike at the heart of the Luftwaffe." Cinematic moment, first combat, December 1st, 1943. The 354th Fighter Group. The Pioneer Mustang Group takes the new P-51Bs into combat for the first time. Their target, Lille in occupied France. The radio chatter crackles as they cross the channel. Cold wind whistles through the cockpit vents. Below them, the gray waters roll toward the distant coast. The German radar stations pick up the formation almost immediately. Within minutes, Focke-Wulf 190s rise from their airfields to intercept. The Mustangs meet them head-on. At 25,000 feet, the two formations merge, silver and gray streaks slicing across the sky. Lieutenant Bradley feels the vibration through the stick as he rolls into the first dive. He sees the 190 flash past Black Cross yellow nose and instinct takes over. He pulls back, lines up the gun sight, and squeezes the trigger. 650 caliber Brownings roar in unison. The tracers connect a clean burst. The German fighter erupts into flame. Over the radio, his wingman shouts, "You got him! You got him, Jack!" Bradley exhales, shaking half in disbelief. The Mustang climbs easily away, the engine still smooth, barely strained. The battle lasts less than 10 minutes, and when it's over, the Americans have their proof. The Merlin Mustang isn't just good, it's a killer. Word spreads. News of the Mustang's performance spreads across England like wildfire. At bases from Debden to Leiston, pilots gather around briefing tables studying photos of the new fighter. They trace its range on wall maps, realizing for the first time that the circles now stretch all the way to the German capital. The promise of the P-51 changes everything. Missions that once seemed suicidal, Berlin, Leipzig, Regensburg, are suddenly possible. Crews who once climbed into their bombers like condemned men now carry a fragile spark of hope. Even the Luftwaffe senses it. Pilots report seeing strange, fast American fighters over France, sleek, long-nosed, uncatchable. In their debriefs, they describe them with a hint of unease. It climbs too quickly. It turns too well. It does not belong to this world. The strategists. In a smoke-filled operations room in England, senior commanders study reconnaissance maps. The air is thick with tension and the smell of burnt coffee. On the table are photographs of German aircraft plants, Messerschmitt at Regensburg, Focke-Wulf at Marienburg, Heinkel at Rostock. General Karl Spaatz taps his pencil on the table. "With these new fighters, we can hit them where it hurts and stay there." Beside him, Doolittle nods. "We've been bleeding for 2 years," he says. "Now we'll make them bleed." The men around the table understand what that means. The war in the air is about to turn from defense to offense. And the weapon that makes it possible is a single-engine fighter built by men who refuse to copy someone else's design. Introspection. The pilots trust back on the flight line. Jack Bradley leans against the wing of his Mustang, watching the sunset burn through the fog. He can still smell the cordite from his guns, the faint tang of hot oil. He thinks about the faces of the men who flew without escorts only months before, men who never came back. Now, for the first time, he feels they have a chance. He pats the fuselage again and murmurs, "You and me, girl. We're going all the way to Berlin." The Mustang doesn't answer, but in the quiet evening, its engine ticks softly as it cools like the fading heartbeat of something alive and restless. Debden Airfield, England, January 1944. A biting wind sweeps across the dispersal fields of RAF Debden, cutting through the thick smell of fuel and frost. The morning sky is a dull silver, still heavy with mist. From the North Sea, mechanics stamp their boots and wrap scarves tighter as rows of new fighters wait beneath. Canvas covers their propellers, motionless, their metal cold to the touch. Inside, the control tower, the faint whine of engines carries. Over the airfield, another Mustang taking off on a test flight. On the flight line, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a leather jacket watches closely, hands in his pockets, a cigarette burning between his fingers. His face's calm expression unreadable, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, follow every movement. This is Colonel Donald James Matthew Blakesley. At 25 years old, he's already a veteran of two air forces and dozens of kills, a man shaped by the unforgiving skies of Europe. And in this winter of 1944, he is about to lead the machine that will break the Luftwaffe's back. A soldier of the sky, Blakesley wasn't born for war, but he seemed built for it. He grew up in Ohio, worked odd jobs, raced cars, and when America was still neutral, he crossed the border into Canada to join the Royal Canadian Air Force. By the time the United States entered the war, Blakesley had already fought in the Battle of Britain, flown Spitfires with the Eagle squadrons, and earned a reputation as a man who preferred the sky to the ground. He was known for his bluntness, his fearlessness, and his ability to read an enemy's moves before they made them. To some, he was reckless. To others, he was the kind of leader only war could create. When the Eagle squadrons were absorbed into the U.S. Army Air Forces as the 4th Fighter Group, Blakesley became one of its rising stars. By 1944, he was promoted to command the entire group, a position that would test not only his skill, but his nerve. A new machine, a new war. In January 1944, Blakesley's unit receives its first P-51 Mustangs. Up until now, they've been flying P-47 Thunderbolts, rugged, dependable, but limited. The Thunderbolt could fight but not follow the bombers deep into Germany. When Blakesley sees the Mustang for the first time, he knows the game has changed. He walks around, the new fighter studying its lines. Its long wings, its Merlin engine humming like a living thing. A crew chief stands nearby, explaining its range, its speed, its quirks. Blakesley doesn't say much. He just nods, takes a drag from his cigarette, and mutters, "Get me one ready to fly." He takes off minutes later without authorization. No co-pilot, no test record, just curiosity and instinct. Up in the cold English sky, the Mustang moves like nothing he's ever flown. It climbs with ease, rolls effortlessly, and when he pushes the throttle, it responds instantly, a perfect blend of power and grace. When he lands, the ground crew rushes to meet him. He pulls off his goggles, grins, and says simply, "We're going to fight the whole goddamn Luftwaffe with these." The mission changes. Blakesley transforms Debden overnight. Under his command, the 4th Fighter Group becomes an elite strike force, fast, ruthless, and efficient. He drills his pilots relentlessly. They learn formation tactics, energy fighting, the art of patience, knowing when to climb, when to dive, when to strike, and when to break. He forbids fear. When a young pilot asks how he should engage the enemy, Blakesley's reply is cold and sharp. "Find the bastards, shoot them down, then come home." There are no inspirational speeches, just discipline, focus, and the promise that under his command they will hit the Reich where it hurts most. Burst long-range mission, February 1944. The dawn of February 20th brings Operation Argument, the start of Big Week. For the first time, American bombers will strike the German aircraft industry directly. Factories at Leipzig, Regensburg, and Schweinfurt are the targets. The Mustangs of the 4th Fighter Group are ordered to escort the bombers all the way to the targets, and back Blakesley briefs his men with quiet intensity. Stay with the bombers until they're through. Then go hunting. The air is thick with anticipation as the engines roar to life. One by one, the Mustangs lift off from Debden, climbing through the gray cloud layers, joining formation with the endless stream of B-17s and B-24s as they cross the coast. The sun breaks through, turning the sea below into a sheet of molten silver. Then the calls begin to come over the radio. Bandits 3 o'clock high. Multiple contacts! The Luftwaffe is waiting. Cinematic combat. The first Berlin raids at 26,000 feet. The sky becomes chaos. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s dive through the bomber stream like Hawk's cannons flashing. The air fills with tracer fire and vapor trails, white scars etched across a blue battlefield. Blakesley's voice cuts through the static. Break and attack. "Take them down! The Mustangs scatter, diving to intercept. Their engines scream as they accelerate, wings trembling under the strain. Blakesley locks onto a 109, pulling out of a dive. He squeezes the trigger, a burst of .50 caliber fire, and the German fighter disintegrates in a cloud of flame and debris. He banks hard left, chasing another target. Debden leader to all flights, stay aggressive. Don't let them reorganize. For the next 20 minutes, the sky above Germany becomes a deadly dance. The bombers continue unbroken, their escorts now fully engaged, cutting through wave after wave of interceptors. By the time the formation turns for home, the Luftwaffe has lost dozens of aircraft. The Mustangs return with empty guns and dented wings, but the bombers for the first time return in strength. A shift in power. Big Week marks the beginning of the end for the German fighter arm. Blakesley's group alone claims dozens of kills, and the impact is immediate. German pilots begin reporting a new American fighter that can outclimb and outturn them even at high altitude. The Luftwaffe is forced to abandon offensive patrols and fight defensively over its own skies. A psychological blow as devastating as any bomb. By March 1944, the 4th Fighter Group is flying to Berlin itself, a feat that had been unthinkable only months before. Blakesley's Mustangs are the first Allied fighters to escort bombers to the German capital and return home. Debden evening aftermath. Back at Debden, as dusk settles over the airfield, the returning aircraft line up for landing, battered, scorched, but alive. The crews climb down, faces gray with exhaustion, eyes still burning from the adrenaline of combat. Blakesley walks the line, counting each returning plane in silence. He stops beside one empty dispersal pad, a Mustang that didn't come back. No words, no salute, just a quiet nod. He moves on to the next aircraft. Later that night, as the base falls quiet, he sits alone in the operations hut, a cup of cold coffee in his hands. He stares at the mission board, now marked with red pins, target struck, losses recorded. He doesn't smile, but in his eyes there's a flicker of something, not victory, but resolve. England, March 1944. The morning begins in silence. A pale fog drapes over Debden airfield, muffling the distant hum of generators and the hiss of hydraulic lines. Frost glitters along the Mustang wings, each drop of dew catching the dim light of dawn. Ground crews move like ghosts through the haze, tightening bolts, checking. Fuel lines stowing ammunition belts of .50 caliber. Round 600 rounds per gun, the sound of them rattling into place, echoing like the rhythm of a drum inside the ready room. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Pilots sit hunched in their flight gear, faces drawn and pale under the fluorescent lights. The operations officer enters, clipboard in hand. He pins the target map to the wall, a red circle around the heart of Germany. Someone whispers under his breath. Berlin. The room goes still. Every man there knows what that means. The center of the Reich, the capital of Hitler's empire. No Allied fighter has ever gone that far. Until today. The plan. It is March 4th, 1944. The mission is part of the continued Big Week offensive, a relentless air assault designed to cripple the German aircraft industry. Hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators will strike targets deep in central Germany, but this time they will not go alone. The 4th Fighter Group under Colonel Don Blakesley will lead the Mustang escort. Their task: protect the bombers all the way to Berlin, engage the Luftwaffe over its own heartland, and if possible return home. It's a mission of audacity bordering on madness. A 12-hour flight, nearly 200 miles round trip. Fuel will be tight, weather unpredictable, enemy resistance certain. But for the men of Debden, this is what they've trained for. This is the day they cross the line between survival and supremacy. Takeoff engines roar to life, shattering the dawn. One by one, the Mustangs roll down the runway, their propeller tips glowing faintly in the rising sun. From the tower, the controller's voice calls out, "Debden leader, you're cleared for takeoff. Good hunting." Blakesley's P-51B, its polished aluminum skin marked with bold red trim, and the call sign WDC surges forward, wheels lifting from the tarmac. Behind him, dozens more rise into the mist, forming a glittering formation that stretches to the horizons. They climb above the clouds. The sun breaks through golden light, flooding the sky, illuminating the bombers already assembling into vast combat boxes. The air vibrates with the sound of hundreds of engines, a mechanical symphony of war. The long reach crossing the North Sea, the Mustangs settle into escort formation. Below them, the gray waters roll endlessly. Ahead, the flat plains of northern Germany dotted with thin columns of smoke where anti-aircraft batteries test their guns. Each man watches his gauges. Fuel pressure, temperature, the lifelines between them and disaster. They know the Mustang's range is its gift, but also its gamble. One miscalculation and they'll be forced to glide home or not at all. Hours pass. The sun climbs higher. Frost on the canopies melts into streaks. Then at 10:47 hours, the call comes through the radio. Bandits inbound, altitude 25,000. Multiple formations. The Luftwaffe has arrived. Over the Reich. High above the Elbe River, the sky fills with movement. Dozens of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s dive from the sun, their yellow noses glinting like predators. Their target, the bomber stream. Blakesley's voice crackles through the static. Debden Group, break and attack! Let's show them what these birds can do. The Mustangs peel away wings, slicing through the thin air. At 28,000 feet, Lieutenant Jack Bradley spots a 109 diving on a formation of B-17s. He rolls inverted, pushes the stick forward, and dives after it. The Merlin engine screams. He closes the distance in seconds. The German pilot never sees him coming. Bradley's tracers reach out short, controlled bursts. The 109 bursts into flame and spirals earthward, leaving a black trail across the blue. Bradley pulls up hard, feeling the G-forces crush his chest. Splash one, he breathes, voice calm but shaking. All around him, the sky becomes a deadly ballet. Contrails twist and shatter as fighters weave between the bombers. Flak bursts bloom like black flowers, their concussion rattling the cockpits. The battle stretches on for more than an hour, a swirling chaos of light, smoke, and death. The first Berlin mission. At 12:15 hours, the bombers reach their target. Through breaks in the cloud, the crews of the 91st and 398th bomb groups glimpse the outline. Of Berlin, a vast sprawl of factories, rail yards, and smokestacks. Below them, the city that once stood untouchable now lies within range as the bomb bays open. The Mustang escorts sweep above, driving off. Another wave of interceptors. Blakesley's voice cuts through again. Stay tight. Keep them off the heavies until the last stick is gone. Thousands of bombs fall through the haze, cascading toward the city in slow, terrible silence. Moments later, the ground erupts in thunder. Black smoke rises in pillars, rolling up into the cold sky like a dark tide. For the first time in the war, the swastika city burns under the protection of American fighters.